Hey everybody, it's Tim from Linessa Farms, Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today. And I have our friend Rick. Rick agreed to come back and visit with us again. Thanks, Rick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing? Hello, everybody.
I am doing good. Hopefully everybody else is doing good. So, Rick, I specifically wanted to talk with you tonight about weaning, about kind of the whole process, maybe pre lambing and kidding through nursing, and then the weaning process, and maybe some of the special considerations we have. You know, there's confinement, there's pasture, there's bottle babies, and this is probably my weak spot.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's ever been my strong point either, but I've tried several different things over the years, and I think what we're doing now, I like.
And okay. Tell me about that. What are some of the changes you've done?
Well, when I was first in the business, we just let the lambs nurse forever and ever. And whenever the mother kicked the lamb off, that's when they got weaned. And we weren't thinking about, we're overfeeding mom to get lambs fed. And we probably should have been weaning them a lot sooner. So then it evolved into, I listened to a neighbor of mine who was very, very radical on how he fed his ewes. At the end of lactation, he would cut them off feed. He'd cut them off hay. He'd cut them off water for 48 hours. It was an abrupt and severe stop to the nutrition to the ewe. And then after a day or two of that, he would take the lambs away. And I've evolved away from that because I think I got more udder issues out of those ewes doing it that way than I do how I do it now. So, and that's our goal, is we want the lambs to become self-sufficient on feed. We don't want to spend any more time having the lamb nurse from mom and overfeed mom just so that she makes milk for the lamb when the lamb could be doing it. And we don't want to damage the udders on those ewes when it's time for them to dry up. So, I mean, those are our goals.
Right. So when we're thinking about lactation, obviously different breeds have different lactation characteristics, and then different animals within the flock are going to have different characteristics as well. You're going to have your good milkers, your subpar milkers. I suppose it's important to ask those questions and to consider that when you're purchasing livestock.
Well, sure. And then for the weaning process and how you're feeding during lactation, if you're feeding large group of ewes and you got poor milkers in with good milkers and singles and with twins and triplets, you're going to get a wide variety of how the lambs look during the process. Because those ewes with singles that are decent milkers, those lambs are going to look fat because they're eating just as good as the ewe that's got triplets on her. Now, she might be a good milker, but if you're only feeding her as good as the ewe that's got a single, she might not be making enough milk for them 3 lambs. And so those are all things, if you have very many, you should probably be splitting them up into management groups so you can feed accordingly.
So let's talk a little bit about that. When you are looking at the ewes that you have on your farm, ideally, are they split up by age as well as the number of offspring in a perfect world, or how far down can you manage that?
On my place, we have mostly singles and twins in the black-faced flock, and we only get the occasional triplet. So on those, I just sort off the ewes that have triplets. because those are the ones that need more feed. Tend to make a pen just for them, and manage those mothers with those lambs separately. There usually aren't very many of them. We get into our commercial ewes, our Elder France ewes. I would say almost half of them have triplets. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of triplets in them, and they're capable of raising triplets. So there, I haven't done it very often, but I'll sort off the ewes that have singles, because that's the small group, and they go somewhere where they don't need very much feed. And so then the big group is almost all twins and triplets, and they get fed to feed those triplets and try and keep those lambs growing and doing as well as they can. But that creates a totally different weaning scenario, because now those ewes are really putting out milk. And if you shut them off the wrong way or too soon, you start to have udder issues.
So when we look at milk production across the board, is there a peak time for milk production for the ewe during the process after birth? Is there a time where they're really technically supposed to be hitting hard? Or
well, they increase in production from birth up to somewhere around that 4 or 5 week period, and all breeds are a little different, but somewhere around that point in time, they're about to hit maximum production. And then over the next 3 or 4 weeks, they'll stay really close to that maximum production. Then after that, they start to go decline. Now, there are some of the milking breeds where they don't have the drop off in milk production. They can go long stretches of time and be given the same amount of milk. But the majority of our breeds aren't designed to be milking sheep. The majority of our breeds are designed for, they get to that peak production, and then they start to level off as the lambs are actually able to develop their stomachs and become eaters and not need the milk. So
this is a good question, and I'll kind of segue off of this too, because so Bobby here is saying that he's got a doe that just threw kids and she cut her teat on barbed wire, and now he's unable to milk out of that teat. And we've seen this happen before as well during shearing. We've seen them get cut during shearing or just during accidents. And surely you've seen something like this happen. What do you do to deal with issues like this? What's your recommendation?
Well, the big thing here is it's probably going to hurt her enough that the lamb's not going to nurse as good. So you need to determine if the lamb is able to survive without nursing on the ewe. And if the lamb is 30 days old or more, it probably will. But you also need to protect that udder from becoming infected. And one of the best things there is the udder balm. It's just lanolin is what it is. It's pure lanolin. You just rub that on there and rub it on there every day for several days, and that'll start to heal it faster than anything else. If they do get an infection, then an antibiotic would be appropriate.
Now,
you can do an external rub on or injectable. Yeah.
No, neither one of us are veterinarians, but I know historically, if I was told when I was a kid, if we had to dry a ewe or a doe off quick, it usually involved pulling the babies, pulling nutrition, and then we would go with like penicillin and dexamethasone. Is that still kind of what you tend to see? Or
penicillin is my go-to antibiotic for any udder issue. It seems to be the one that I get the most success out of.
And I know
dexamethasone is mostly just to help them shed fluid,
right?
So that they don't retain fluid or retain milk in their udder as easily. Yep.
Yeah, and I know Dr. Kennedy from Pipestone. That was always his. When you read his literature, it was very much heavy leaning on penicillin for anything udder related. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the types of bacteria that we're dealing with in that regard. I think they tend to the bacteria that you would run into with mastitis and stuff tend to be very responsive to penicillin. So okay, so I guess let's start at the beginning and kind of roll forward. So when we're looking at nutrition needed for our females that are getting ready to have their babies, is there danger in overfeeding? Is there danger and not enough? And what's our outcome when we mess with this?
Okay, so you got to be careful at the end of pregnancy that you don't either over increase or pull back too much, because you don't want to create a ketosis event. So you want to be pretty steady on your feeding those last few weeks of pregnancy, just so you don't get that. And then at my place during when they lamb, we feed soy hulls. So that first day or two, we don't hardly feed them any grain. They just get a little bit of hay. And then maybe the second or third day, then we go back to our grain diet, which is when the lamb jug, it's all soy hulls. So we can increase the soy hull ration without fear of overeating disease. And then we just build them back up to getting what they should for their production stage. You know, those first 3-4 days, they're producing more milk than most lambs can eat. And so you don't really need to overpower them with nutrition those first few days. But after about that 1 week mark, the lambs start to consume more than mom, or as much as mom is making. And that's when we need to start increasing their energy and their protein. And we keep increasing that through those first 2 to 3 weeks, find a level that's appropriate, and then we coast for 3-4 weeks there.
Okay. Now, when lambs are born, for those individuals that don't know out there, sometimes we talk about stripping the teats out. What is that about?
Well, they're all when the lambs are born, that udder's not been functioning since the last time she had lambs, and so the end of the teat has got a little plug in it. It's buildup of waxes at the end of the opening, and all you got to do is like pull on a little to make that plug come out. Once that plug comes out, then it's much easier for the milk to come out. Now,
Gotcha.
In nature, it's up to the lambs to suck that out and get it out. Now, every once in a while, there's one whose the wax plug's so difficult that it's hard to get out. And there are some lambs that aren't capable. So that's why we just, to make sure they got milk, just go up there, squeeze that first little bit out, you know you got the plug, and then you know they got milk.
Gotcha.
And you can also feel if they're hard, if they got a mastitis spots or they got a mastitis starting, you'll be able to tell that by the firmness of the udder. If it doesn't feel normal, or if it's got warmth in it, then you know you got something else going on too.
Yep. What would you advise people look for people that are new to this and maybe you're having a mom first time with babies that they're experiencing? Is there anything that you look for, any signs or of problems that kind of catch your eye or that you're peeking for during this early lactation period?
Watch the manure on the lambs. If it's all real hard and little chunks, and the lambs are having a hard time passing it because it's all little hard, it'll still look like colored because it's their only thing they're eating is milk. But if it's all real hard chunks, they're not getting enough milk. And if it's real runny, then you might have something like E. coli or some other bacterial scour thing going on, and it's important to stop it quick in baby lambs. So bedding, lots and lots of bedding, and that solves a lot of these issues, because most of the lamb scours is because the environment's not clean, and most of mastitis is because those ewes' udders are laying in environments that aren't clean enough to keep the bacteria from spreading.
Gotcha. So I utilize creep feed, free choice creep feed. It works well based off the breeds that I raise. And so that can help offset some nursing. I would suspect a little bit if they're not getting enough, but this takes time. And so usually
the quicker you introduce them to feed, the quicker they'll get used to it and start eating it. Even the ewes that have real good milk supplies, if you get those lambs learning quickly to go eat, they'll go eat. And one of the best things for them to eat is a real leafy alfalfa hay. They just love that. And that'll get their rumen to start quicker. That'll that'll teach them to go nibble. That is like the best thing for them to eat on. And then always have some water in the creek too, because it's amazing how much little lambs will drink water that moms can't crowd them away from.
Yeah, I agree. And we always look forward to getting our first couple of lambs and kids going on creep, because then they teach their friends how to do it. You know, those first couple ones of the season are always, I would say, the slowest to get started. But once they get going, then the rest of them just join
they
the
all
party.
teach one another. You bet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then even bottle lambs. If you've got bottle lambs, have a pad of hay and some creep feed in the pen with them, wherever they are. And if you've got an older lamb that can get in there with them and teach them to eat, that's great, because like you said, they need those siblings to teach them. Yeah,
I agree. We encourage people to, even if they have bottle lambs, we encourage them to keep the bottle lambs out with the flock and go out there to feed them. Keep them out of your living room if you can. And that's just, they learn how to be. They learn how to do what they're supposed to do. They definitely respond better.
And not only that, they can steal from those other mothers. If they're a really good bottle lamb that's smart, they'll steal actual milk from the other mothers.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we got a couple that run around and that's all they do all day long. They just ping, 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 go from one mom to the other, and they get pretty good at it. So moving forward in the lactation process, how long, what do you have a window? Do you have like a goal? Like you want them cut off by a certain amount of time, or?
I shoot for a 60-day mark for being weaned. And so my process is at that 6-week long mark, we start cutting back on the grain. Still feed them decent hay at that point, but we cut back on the grain. And over a week to 2 weeks time, we'll be down to where we're feeding them no grain. At say the 7 to 7.5 week mark, we'll feed them no grain, and we'll change from good hay to medium quality hay, or you can even go to poor hay if you want, but you don't really have to go to real poor hay. I know there are people that go to straw those last few days, and I don't think that's necessary. I've seen flocks where they go to straw and starve them on water for days and days and days. And now you've got a ewe who's producing a ton of milk and no nutrition to replace that. And you get real skinny ewes. And somewhere along the way, you got to put that weight back on them. So I think it's better if you don't take that weight off. What you need to do is to convince them to not produce milk. And there's more ways than just nutrition to do that. What I like to do is that last 10 days before your target of weaning the lambs, start locking those lambs in the creep. So maybe 10 days before, you only lock them in for an hour, and then the next day 2 hours. And by only, pretty soon you're locking them in half the day or all night. And then when weaning day comes, those ewes have been stimulated to milk less because the lambs are gone more. The lambs are a little more used to not being with their moms. They're kind of past some of that trauma. And when you do cut them completely off, you don't get as much bellowing, and the mothers are already producing less milk. Even though you may not have cut the nutrition way back, because they're not being nursed as much, their demand for milk, it changes their desire to make more milk is what it does. And I have a lot more success weaning lambs doing that than some of the other methods I've tried.
That makes sense. So let's talk about the logistics of weaning. I'll give you an example. We've had disasters that we've heard of in the past where people try to wean them onesie twosies. They try to, maybe wean a few lambs out of a group and then a few more. And then it ends up being that the lambs that are left that don't have moms try to steal from the other moms. And then we've talked about you should move the ewes, leave the lambs where they're used to being, and move the moms. There's tons of different thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on some of that?
I don't like trickle weaning because of the things you said. Because now you're trying to feed some that need to be making milk less than you should, and those that need to be weaned, you're feeding them more than you should. Try and group them, and they don't have to all hit that 60-day mark. If you're anywhere from actually 45 days, you can be successfully wean lambs. It's a little trickier because now you've got udders that are harder to shut down, but you can go to 75 or 80 days. I mean, that's not going to matter. Most of us do not accelerate our lambings, and we don't have to be in a great big hurry to get the ewes weaned. We could go to 70 or 75 days, and it's not going to hurt anything. But when you trickle lamb, it's hard to get any of them right, is what I find.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is there any times that you would want to keep a lamb on a mom longer? Is there ever any reason why you would hold out longer before weaning, or any reason why you'd pull early?
If you've got a mother who's a very poor milker and the lambs are struggling, sometimes weaning those lambs earlier forces them to go eat more. And then they actually do better than trying to find a half an ounce of milk off a mom who doesn't want to milk. And I've seen that many a time where that struggling lamb, as soon as you wean it, it takes off. Those are cases where you might want to wean earlier if you have some of them. The only ones I can think of where you want to wean further down the road is you got that old ewe that's a real milk cow, and she's got an udder the size of a basketball, and her lambs are doing really good. And if you wean her at 8 weeks, she's still going to be making a gallon and a half a day. So that might be one where you take a little more time because you want to protect that udder.
Yep. Right. And we have a couple of those that they're just milk machines, yeah. So real quick, while I'm thinking of the milk machines, as far as lopsidedness, we've experienced that in the past where sometimes, and I don't know if I did this right, so I'll get your take on it, where we'll have a heavy milking mom that has a single, and if that baby can't keep up, it'll get kind of hooked on the idea of nursing off of one side.
Yep.
And then the other side gets so big they can't nurse off of it. And we'll usually milk them down off the full side, and it seems like the baby usually will go back to it. Do you have any thoughts about that, or is that kind of what you do?
Usually I'll milk them once and maybe save that milk if it's still got colostrum in it. If they usually the lamb will go to that side and start working on it after you've milked them once. If they don't, going back and keeping milking it isn't really going to solve your problem, because they're just, that size is going to have to start shutting off. And if you keep milking, it's not going to shut off.
Right.
You don't want to, that's a catch-22. If you leave it stay full and too tight, you could still develop that mastitis. But if you keep milking it, you keep opening it up for that bacteria to get in too.
Have you ever had to file teeth before?
Yes. So
how did you know?
Because there's scars on mother's udder or scrapes, or they've actually even cut into the nipple, and mom will kick and walk away instead of letting them nurse. And usually when you've got anything of those symptoms, you go check that lamb's teeth, and they're crooked or they're long or they're really sharp. And you get the fingernail file that the politicians like to hand out in parades, and you go and file their teeth down.
Okay. And you just knock that edge off, basically?
That edge off so it's not quite so sharp.
Gotcha.
And that usually solves the problem. It seems it can be unnerving because you're sitting there grinding on them teeth, and you can feel it all the way through your bones, kind of, but you got to bear down and get it so it's not sharp.
We had a question here from Ahmed, and he watched. He must have watched our video about the Australian white sheep. Have you ever had the Australian white?
No,
white sheep.
I have not yet. I'm just going off of their reports. So
yeah, I keep hearing it's like the greatest. It's the greatest sheep meat ever. I don't know. I've never had one either.
All I have is the one ram. I haven't had any lambs yet, And those
Okay.
those ewe lambs that I did breed to him, they're due to start lambing here in about a week. So we
Okay.
will be having some, and we will give them a taste test down the road.
Is there any? You've raised lots of breeds. Do you have one that really sticks out to you that has really good milk production? That if you had to say the best you've had?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. The Dorsets are the best milk producers, and then my Ile de France have a lot of Dorset in them because the Ile de Frances did not come to this country as a pure breed. They come in other breeds, and mostly there's Dorset in with them. So their milking ability goes back to the Dorset, and anything with Dorset in it milks really good. Yep.
Okay. So post weaning, when we're thinking about the moms, and I've gotten, it never fails, once a year we get a call from someone, and they wean the babies, they go through the process, they do everything right, and then 2 days after they wean, they put the moms back on full feed, and blammo,
the udders refill, and pretty soon they've got hard udders, and then the ewes are walking around like their back legs are sore, and it's because the udder's hurting them. And yeah, keep those ewes on mediocre hay and water, and let them drink water. I mean, there's people that pull the water away, and I think that's the wrong thing to do. And so, yeah, don't go putting them back on grain right away. Give them the time for that milk supply to shut off. Yep.
Okay. So when we're we're a couple months down the road, I like to check my bags when we're shearing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like my favorite time to check them. I got them on their butt. I can feel the bag. Talk to us about some warning signs that people may see, or maybe let's say you're buying a ewe that's coming off of a farm, or going against my better advice and telling you not to buy them from the sale barn. But what's something that someone wants to look for on a ewe that would be a warning sign?
Well, look for udders that have hard spots in them, like lumps. Sometimes you'll see lumps that are just that big in them. Doesn't mean that she won't milk, but it means she's got diminished capacity. Look at a lot of times, if they had a mild case of mastitis, you might see like they've got one tit hanging down that's like that big and swelled up, and the other one's only that big and hardly swelled at all. It means that they got a little infection, or they got something in that side, and go feel that. If it's hard, well, that means that side of the udder probably is never going to work right. Or if the whole udder is hard. I don't mean firm. I mean hard, because if it's hard, it had an infection, and it's never going to milk right. Those are the big things to look for. There are some ewes that have pendulous udders, where that just means they hang down after they dry up. I wouldn't let that bother me. It just means they might have low nipple placement when they do have lambs, but usually those udders don't tend to be a problem. Anything that's one side's bigger than the other, that's usually a problem.
About extra nipples on or extra udders on females, do you deal with that at birth? Is there anything you should or should not do? Is that a problem?
I'll tell a little story. I was selling a Shropshire ewe at Ohio one year, and they have a show, and I looked at the class and I thought, man, I got the best ewe out here. I should win the class. And the judge is someone that a lot of people know from Ohio, and this one thing is his pet peeve. He goes through and he checks all the classes, and he mouths all the teeth to make sure they're right. And then he also sticks his hand up under the udder and feels for how many nipples they have. And I didn't know this about the guy. And then he picked my sheep first, but he wasn't picking me to be first. He's picking me to be last. And I thought I had the best sheep in the class.
Oh, no.
And afterwards I went and asked, what was wrong with my sheep? Why'd you pull me out last? He goes, your ewe has 4 nipples. And I go, what? He goes, yeah, your ewe has 4 nipples. So someday out in the middle of the pasture, when she lambs without nobody around, that lamb's going to suck on that blind nipple, and then that lamb's going to die because it's only sucked on the blind nipple. And I go, well, okay, I get it, but most of these sheep aren't going to lamb out in the middle of the pasture with nobody around. But that was his pet peeve. Ewes with 4 nipples was his pet peeve.
And you got the wrong judge on the wrong day.
I got the wrong judge on the wrong sheep. You betcha. But I get it now. I've done enough sheep that most of the time that 3rd or 4th nipple is just a problem. It gets in the way. One guy told me when you're out in the barn on those baby lambs, you tip all them ewe lambs up and you look for those extra nipples, and then you take your cigar, get it nice and red, and burn that 3rd and 4th nipple off. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't smoke cigars out in the barn, so that I had to come up with some other way to fix that.
The farmer I grew up working for, he would either ban them if he could ban them off. He had, with little itty, he had I don't even know where he got these things. They were almost like you would see them on braces, like tiny, and he would band them. Okay. Or he would do a ligature with I guess it would have been a braided line of fishing line or something. He would tie them off. But his thought was you got to get rid of them because the same thing. He said, they'll nurse on that blind nipple and then they'll starve. I don't know, but that's what he used to do. I
got the occasional Elder France ewe who those 3rd and 4th nipples will actually give milk.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And sometimes that's a benefit and sometimes that's a detriment, because if you have 3 lambs, it's a benefit because now they have a place to nurse. But it's a detriment if they think that that's going to give them enough to eat, because it's not. They just get a few drops out of them usually, and they don't actually produce very much.
Right.
So I always worry about what cutting them off creates an infection point to where you could maybe create a problem and lose that udder before you even used it.
Mm-hmm.
If you got one where a lamb is nursing on that 3rd or 4th nipple and it doesn't want to give up the idea, you get out your super glue and you glue that nipple up to the side of the udder, and then it can't get a hold of it.
I've never thought of that, but that makes sense. I've never cut them. I've never removed them because from my perspective, there's no way for me to know if that thing has any kind of a glandular attachment to it or not. I can't tell if it's just there for show or if it's actually got something. Like you said, you start cutting on that and then you get an infection in the bag and you can lose it before you ever use it.
Yeah.
So you're
my go-to way to fix it is the super glue it up if you get a lamb that is determined to nurse on it. Yeah.
Right. Have you ever seen navel sucking with bottle babies?
Yeah, I have had that happen.
God, that's annoying.
And it is hard to cure. It is really hard to cure. So the one time I had it wasn't just the navel; they were sucking on the buck lambs too.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So I ended up putting a lamb like a blanket, a tube on the lamb, so that the others would quit, because it had more than one doing it. And I ended up moving that lamb out, and then they wanted to do others, and so I had to figure out. It's sort of like tail biting in pigs. You got to figure out who the culprit is, and you got to move them out.
Right.
Yeah. Because they're not going to change their behavior.
No.
Yeah.
No. So here's an extreme that we could have a whole show about this question. So, I mean, honestly, because that's a really hard question to answer, because it depends.
I can think of 5 variables right off the bat.
So based off of what we're talking about now, when we're talking about lactating moms, is there a certain set amount of grain that you're giving your lactating moms, or are you kind of just going by body condition and alternating what you're doing there?
Depends on what I have available for feed. If I have a good supply of soy hulls and it's my white-faced ewes and I have a high percentage of triplets, they go on the full feed soy hull feeder and get all they want. And you can't do that with everybody, but in that situation, it works good.
So tell people about, and we've talked about this before, but this may be new to some people tonight. Talk to us briefly about soy hulls and what's so special about them. Why is it that you can feed free choice soy hulls where you can't feed other things free choice?
Well, soy hulls are all digestible fiber. There is no starch in them, and so you would not get the overload to the rumen potential with them that you would like with corn or oats or barley, because those are all starch-based grain, and soy hulls are pure fiber. They're highly digestible fiber, so if they eat all they want of them, they're going to poop loose like a cow, but they're not going to have overeating disease or acidify their rumen in eating them. And so it's very easy to get them up to full feed without them getting sick. And that's why I like soy hulls.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So let's shift gears and talk about the difference in management styles when we look at confinement versus animals that may be raised out on pasture.
Okay.
Are we reinventing the wheel completely on this? Is it somewhat similar?
It's a different approach more than anything. When you're on pasture, you are going to wean a little later. You're not going to try and wean at 60 days. You're going to shoot closer to 90. When I was weaning groups on pasture, I would shoot for the oldest to be 90 and the youngest to be 75. And the majority of the time, when I was on the pasture with those kinds of groups, my lambing interval was 20 days or less. So you had that tight of a window. If you started going past that 90-day mark, some of them older ram lambs would actually breed the mothers. And so it was, if you were going to leave those lambs on the ewes past 90 days, you needed to have banded those ram lambs, or you were going to start having lambs when you didn't want. So you shoot for a little longer time on the ewe so that you don't, because when you're out on the pasture, you don't want to reduce the nutrition to the old ewe, because if you do, you're reducing the nutrition to the lambs because they're on the same pasture. And you want them to be eating good pasture. So what I would do is I would just add more time before I would wean. That way those udders were more protected. The lambs were, usually when you're on pasture, lambs learn to eat grass on pasture faster than lambs learn to eat grain inside a barn. That's something I've always noticed. Those lambs learn to eat grass quick because they're standing right next to mom. Mom's eating grass all the time. And so they pick up on that eating grass real quick. And they're usually more than ready to be weaned when you get to that point in time. The big thing when I was pasture raising, when it was weaning time, you didn't want to leave them on the same farm, because those mothers would beller and those lambs would beller, and it didn't matter how good your fences are or if they were a half mile apart, they'd find each other again. Mm-hmm. And you'd always have escapes and they'd always be together. So what I got to doing was I would just remove the ewes from the farm. I'd take them somewhere else. And that seemed to work the best, because then that anxiety went away a lot quicker.
Right.
Now, I know there's cattle farms where they just put barbed wire fence up between the calves and the cows and let them walk and talk to one another. Well, I don't think we could do that in just sheep, because those lambs will go through that fence.
Yeah. We keep kind of a no man's land, even in the confinement situation. We don't have a single, we don't ever put them to where there's just a single fence. They always have some degree of separation to where they can't get nose to nose, because they'll just go bananas, And hell, I mean, you get a good mom, I've seen them let the baby nurse through the fence.
Yep.
So
when we were on the pasture, the big secret was just get them as far apart as you can. Even if you don't have another place to go to, the lambs are in this far right corner, and the ewes are in that far left corner, and as far apart as you can, as many fences in between as you can. And you got to do that for a week or so, or they're just going to keep getting back together.
Gotcha.
I had one buck lamb who was very determined to be back with his mom, and then the next summer I had a whole bunch of lambs before I wanted.
So for individuals that do not creep feed, they don't creep feed at all, what considerations can they make? What other things can you do in place of grain feeding? So a lot of times people associate creep feeding with grain feeding. there's other ways to give them added nutrition without grain feeding, correct?
Well, yeah, even if you don't want to feed your lambs a creep feed, I would still give them a creep. That way they have a separate place to go get water, and you can feed them better forage than you are your mothers. So you might have $10 a bale alfalfa hay, but you want to feed mom a $4 bale. And you do that by using a creep feeding area. Even though you're not giving them grain, you're giving them better roughage. And it's just a place for the lambs to get away from the ewes. And so you can still use my method. It just, you aren't using grain, and you'll want to go to a little longer age to make that work better for you, because those lambs aren't going to have put on as many pounds of fat, and they're not going to have developed their stomach maybe quite as much in that 8-week period. You might need 9 or 10 weeks to do something, to do it that way. Yep.
Are babies any more prone to bloat than the adults? Is it about the same? Like my fields, we have a lot of clover here. We have a lot of alfalfa. I always keep an eye on my animals for bloat, but with them raised on pasture with their mom, does it seem like they transition into that better?
They're going to be a little less prone to bloat because their rumen is not developed fully like their mother's is.
Mm-hmm.
When they're 30 or 40 days old, their rumen probably isn't hardly started to expand. They've probably eaten stuff that goes to the rumen, but that rumen needs time to expand and develop and get those bacteria built up in there. And that rumen doesn't really fully functional till they're several months old. I mean, it'll be working at that time, at that 6 to 8 week point, but it won't be fully functional till later on. So yeah, they're a little less likely to bloat. If they're raised on pasture along with their mothers, they're less likely to bloat. But lambs can still bloat. And another type of bloat we get is in bottle lambs. We get abomasal bloat.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah,
I
feed
don't
them
know
too
that,
long. Yeah.
I don't know that I fully understand abomasal bloat. Maybe you could educate me on that.
I don't really understand it either, to be honest with you. I know what the literature says, and it says that, you need to wean them as early as possible. I know some of the veterinarians, the old veterinarians that I know with bottle babies, they were trying like hell to wean them at 40 days. And they just said, anytime you go past that, you start getting into the 6-week period and past that, the risk for abomasum bloat increases exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never been given a real reason why that is. But it seems that it's one of those things that, I don't know. We see the same thing in healthcare. It's like people that smoke have a 70% increased risk of bladder cancer. Nobody knows why,
Don't
but
quite understand the connection, but it's there.
Right.
So,
and I know the abomasum bloat, I've read literature from many veterinarians, and they say if you get into the 6-week and past point, you're playing with fire, because one of these days they're just going to lay down and die.
yeah.
So
So what I do on my bottle lambs is, as soon as I can teach them to drink cold milk, they get cold milk.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll mix my milk and put it in bottles and throw it in the fridge, and I'll take it out to them the next feeding that cold. And
Yes.
make them drink cold, and try and keep feed in front of them so that they don't ever overload, so they go and nurse a little, go lay down because they're full, come back and nurse a little more because they got hungry, and don't ever get to where their bellies are sticking way out from their sides because you're only feeding them 2 or 3 times a day and they're having to overload to get enough. And then when 30 days comes around, it's time to wean them.
Yeah. And we do the same thing with the cold milk. I like the cold milk because it just slows them down.
Yep.
They get a chill and they stop. And the other thing, like you said, is as far as keeping that creep full all the time, we try to keep it full all the time. And people ask me a lot. They say, well, aren't my animals going to overeat? And no, if they know that it's there whenever they want it, they don't go in and gorge themselves like they do if you're only going out once or twice a day. Now, you can get yourself in a hell of a trick bag by letting that thing run empty for 6 hours and then going out and filling it up again.
Yeah, because they really want to eat it down, something fierce then. But yeah, what I'll do when it's getting close to that 30 days is, instead of letting them have all the time free choice, I will let them run out of milk. And because then what they do, they go eat more feed.
Yep.
And as soon as I can tell that they're eating more feed, it's time to wean them.
Right.
Especially bottle lambs, because I don't get the abomasal bloat thing. And I'm like you said, you get to that 6-week point, they come down with it right and left, and you don't quite understand why.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And there's nothing you can do about it when you got it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And most of the time you just go out there and you find them dead. Now we haven't had that happen in a long time because we don't go out that far. But I get lots of, probably the two biggest things that I get from people that contact us is they've got lambs or kids with really bad scours. And we figure out that they're just feeding the snot out of them with that bottle. They're putting the bottle in their mouth constantly. And the other thing is people contact us and they're like, I had an 8-week-old lamb or an 8-week-old goat kid and they were doing great. And then I went out there the next morning and they're dead. And they show you a picture or something and their guts just all distended and blown up and it's unfortunate. So here we had a question, kind of shifting gears. We're looking at vaccinations. We do, if we bring in naive ewes, we brought in some ewes from like Montana that were on the range and stuff and had no exposure to anything. We've vaccinated them up. I don't across the board. How do you treat Vibrio and chlamydia?
We hadn't had a big turnover in our ewe flock in a long time, so I had gotten away from vaccinating for it, because we would vaccinate for it and we'd still have some outbreak. So we did the Doc Kennedy method, where we would purge them with Aramycin crumbles, and then we put Rumensin in the feed. The Rumensin would control if you were having tetracycline, the cat.
Toxoplasmosis.
Toxoplasmosis. The Rumensin tends to stop the toxo, and the Aramycin crumbles would stop the Vibrios. And so we were blasting them with that, high doses just before lambing, and then we would back down. And then if we thought we had another problem, we would blast them again. But now you can't hardly do that because there's controls on the Aramycin.
Right.
You have to have a veterinary script to get it. So now we do different. If we think we're going to have a problem, we give a vaccination of LA200 instead of doing the Aramycin blast. But that's going to be taken away from us now too. So I'll probably have to go back to vaccinating, but vaccinations for me never were a solution.
No, I think I think people would be disappointed, and most people that have vaccinated their flock have had the same experience. Some people seem to be very disappointed. They think it's going to be a for sure thing, like, oh, I'm going to vaccinate and I'm not going to get this, and nah, not so much. I think there's such a wide demographic of breeds and different strains that it's really, really difficult for anyone to manufacture a vaccine that's going to be 100% effective. We see that with sore mouth too. A lot of you'll still see sore mouth even with the vaccine. I have the sore mouth collection. Anytime I get new sore mouth, I'm out there picking scabs and putting it in my jar.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
So you vaccinate for sore mouth the same way I do. You pick a few scabs and use your own needle, and that's how I do it.
And then you're getting the strain that's there.
Yep.
it's the antiquated method, but it's proven itself over the past couple hundred years. It's
it's a virus that if they get exposed to it, they're going to get it. If they get it under their armpit instead of on their mouth, it's better.
Right. So let's talk about, we got about 10 minutes left, and I did want to talk with you about when we are looking at replacement ewes. When you're looking at, you're going through, you're doing your culling, and you're looking at these ewe lambs that are going to be your future prospects. How do you treat them? How do you take a ewe lamb and progress her to where she needs to be so you know she's going to be ready to be a good mom?
So I full feed a lot of my lambs because the quicker they go to market, the better. But those are myself. I got to get them off the full feed by the time, well, in my breed, by the time they're 90 to 100 pounds, I got to start thinking about getting them off the full feed because that's when they'll start to get too fat. You don't want them to get too fat. You want them to grow. You want them to keep them as ewe lambs. You especially want to feed them and keep them coming because you want them to be well mature by the time you breed them. If you're going to wait till their second year to have their first lamb, then you can go a lot slower. You can go to a pasture and not give them any grain and just let them grow slow. You can be on a lot with just hay and grow slow. But if you're going to show them or you're going to breed them as lambs, you should probably feed them a little more so that they can get to their mature size quicker. That's just depends on where you want to be for management, but you don't want to get them too fat because when they get too fat, you start to have other issues like you were talking earlier in the program. Some people have udders that go bad before they even have a lamb. And well, sometimes it's because they overprotein them when they're young. And if they're too fat, they won't breed that first time very easily. So you want to bring them somewhat slow unless you're going to breed them early. And then you still got to bring them at a good speed, but not too fast to overdo the condition.
So we had a question here about age, and I think we're more concerned about maturity than we are age, are we not? We're more concerned about where are you at body-wise.
So maturity is the key. So if you were raising Columbias, they're not going to be mature till they're almost 2. If you're raising Dorpers, they're mature when they're 7 or 8 months. So there's a difference in age to maturity. But so what you're wanting to look at is the rule of thumb is that they're between 75 and 80% of a mature weight before they get bred. So if your ewe flock, if your ewes weigh 200 pounds, you want those ewe lambs to be weighing 150 to 160 pounds before they get bred. So, you have to, if your ewe flock is only 150 pounds when they're mature, then you're looking at, I got to think about it, 125 to 130 pounds before you breed them. So, 75% of a mature weight is a good point for breeding them the first time.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about breeding back? So when we pull these ewes, we dry them out. If for these accelerated programs where people really want to breed them back quick, or let's say you had a January baby and you want to flip that ewe around and have her lamb again, maybe late fall.
The thing to do is you gotta push the recovery on those ewes. So as soon as you know they're dry, you start putting nutrients back in them so that they can be in good enough shape to be ready to breed. And what you were taking 5-6 months to get in the right shape to breed again, now you got to do in 3, or 2 maybe, depends on what you're trying to accomplish. The people that are on the STAR system, they've got 73 days to get them back in shape. And depending upon the breed of the ewe, 73 days to go from having been drawn down from lactation to being ready to breed can be tough. It can be hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So depends on how much you want to accelerate them. If you're going to be high management and you want them to accelerate all the time, then you got to also be high management on feed, because it just plain takes more nutrition.
Do you find that the ewe's body gives out before the end of her lifespan? That is to say, will they generally outlive their ability to be good as far as production is concerned?
The more you would accelerate that ewe, the quicker the end of her production cycle comes. So that's what I've seen. You take those, there are ewes that you can accelerate every year, year after year, and they'll still live to be 10 or 11 years old and have lambs. But generally, it takes a year or two off their production cycle if you keep them accelerated, because it's just hard for that body to keep up with the nutrition. Yep.
What's your favorite age for moms? Is there like a golden window of age that you feel like they're in their prime?
When they're in their prime,
Yeah.
the 3rd to the 6th year is their prime. So if they lamb as a ewe lamb, they're almost always going to have a single. I don't care what breed it is. There aren't as many of them have twins as have singles. And then the next year, they'll have more twins, and those lambs will do really good. But it's that 3rd year when those lambs seem to be the best growers. Mom has reached her full maturity. She's caught up maybe on nutrition enough that she's got a little more reserves in her body. And that seems to be when she does the best job of feeding those lambs, is when she's hit that 3rd year. And that doesn't matter if she lambed as a ewe lamb or a 2-year-old. It just seems like that 3rd year is when they hit their prime.
How much effect do you think season and temperature has on the overall health of the moms and the babies? Do you think that the cold is harder on them than the heat? I mean, is there a time of the year that you prefer? Or I guess there's concerns with each season.
Yeah,
right?
there is. I think cold weather for baby lambs is actually better than hot weather.
I do too.
The air is cleaner. You have less pneumonias when it's cold than when it's warm. You have to have more concern about exposure, but if you've got buildings or you got plenty of bedding, they can take a ton of cold and be just fine. They're more than capable of handling cold. Heat, on the other hand, a lot harder for them to deal with heat.
Yeah.
The hair sheep can handle heat better than the wool sheep, but heat is one of those things that you got to have ways to mitigate heat, because it's harder for them to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And those flies just love a newborn. I'll tell you. Oh gosh. Boy, for somebody that's never had one in the summer, boy, that's a serious concern. Like they'll cover a baby.
When I started pasture lambing, I started lambing the first part of April because I wanted to avoid the flies. Well, right now we're at the 1st of April. How much grass do we have? We don't hardly have any. So and it'd be gone in a few hours if the sheep are out there. And so I kind of got away from 1st of April lambing and went more to the end of April lambing. Well, that was fine, but then you got those few stragglers. Guess what? Now you're toward the end of May lambing. By then, you start to get flies, and you're right. If you weren't on top of it, flies would take a white lamb and turn them black just like that. And so I got to where I carried a can of fly spray and one shot of fly spray, and then they were fine. And as soon as they were dry, they were fine. But if you weren't there at first, those flies were vicious. Yep.
Yeah. So for individuals that are looking to purchase, maybe they want to bring a new ewe into their farm, or they're looking to buy replacement ewe lambs, do you sell all year round, or do you have kind of a window of time that you would advise people contact you?
I've usually got something to sell. This year I've had a run on the white-faced ewes, and I will not have any mature white-faced ewes to sell. I will have some lambs to sell, but we don't start weaning them probably for another month, and I'll kind of keep those around for 2-3 months, and then I'll start to sell them off to the market. So yeah, I've had more run on mature ewes than normal. So
Okay. Is there anything you associate to that, or is it just?
Well, people that flush their high value show stock, they need
Mhm.
good recip moms. And so
Yes.
they come to me and buy my white face shoes for recip moms. And I've had 2 real big orders this year. So I'm pretty much sold out on white face shoes to take care of those 2
Well,
big orders.
that's a good problem to have, right?
Yes, it is. So, and I tell you what, a guy could turn his entire flock into a business and nothing but producing recip ewes for some of these guys because they need a lot and they want them in their prime. So,
What would that look like?
a lot of them want to buy those 3 to 5 year old ewes while they're in their prime, so they can get 2 to 3 good recip years out of them. I like to, and they also like for them to have lambed at least once or twice, so you know that they're going to be a decent mom. So I'll sell those 3 and 4 year old ewes is what I've been selling mostly. I get a little more for them because they're in their prime, and it
Right.
does keep my ewe flock really young when I start doing that. And I go through a year like this, and I can't sell any for a year or two because I got to build them back up. But
Mhm.
you know, it is a good
Yes.
way to sell some sheep.
Yeah, sometimes that stings. We get people that call us and they're like, "We need a really good ewe that's 2 to 3 years old," and I'm like, "Oh, well, they're 2 to 3 years old on my farm for a reason, and that's because I kind of wanted to keep them, and but I understand, and if you can get a good proven ewe, that's worth its weight in gold, that's for sure.
Yes.
Um,
And
so
these are repeat customers. They're very happy with what they've gotten in the past, and they know they work, and so they come and
right,
ask me for more. So those are the kind of customers I
awesome.
like.
Yes, sir. So we'll have all of your contact
Okay.
information in the description below for anybody that wants to contact you. They can reach out to you and contact you. Uh, we'll probably try to meet back up maybe in a couple months on here at least. I'll talk to you, of course, before
Okay.
then. But I think for our next meeting, I'd like to talk more about maybe we can kind of follow the season. Maybe we can shift gear into some nutrition. Come in a couple months, everybody's going to want to be knowing how to pack the pounds on their show animals. And there's definitely a right and a wrong way to do that. That's for sure.
Well, if you want to talk about commercial lamb packing, I'm better at that than show lambs, but I have fed a few show lambs in my day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I bet you've had more than a few in your day, Rick. But I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying. Nutrition is nutrition, though. I mean, when you're looking at healthy nutrition to add on quality carcass size, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way. That's for sure. So yeah, we'll talk
Okay.
and we'll talk to you again
All
soon.
right. Thanks, Tim.
All right, my friend. Well, hey everybody, thanks for joining us again tonight. Rick, thank you for joining us. I know everybody
Pleasure.
appreciates it. Yeah, and we will talk to all of you soon. So good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us again.
Good night.